This section of notes, we're going to be looking at the history, government, and economics of Europe, all compiled into one mini lesson. First subsection I want to look at is ancient Greece and ancient Rome. In Greece's mountainous landscape, this led to the development of what was known as city-states. A city-state is an area with sovereignty. The word sovereignty means power within the people. It means political power that a group of people have. What a city-state was that it was a state, in other words, it was a nation the size of a city. The agricultural land around that city was controlled by that city. It was used for economic and purposes and food, and it was used as a buffer zone for other city-states as well. The ancient Greeks laid the foundation for modern-day government systems, especially in Athens. Athens had a direct democracy, which was literally voting on every single issue. Citizens that could vote would pick either a light-colored rock or a dark-colored rock to vote for an issue that they wanted to. If they were going to say yes to the issue, they would pick a light-colored rock. If they were going to say no, they would pick a dark-colored rock. So we get democracy from ancient Athens city-state. And then the Romans imitated what the Greeks did, but they did it at a much larger scale. They created the world's largest empire of the time and ruled much of Europe as well as northern Africa, Southwest Asia, and even parts into Central Asia, and became one of the most powerful empires the world had ever seen. Then we move on to the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages is known as the period between ancient and modern times. One of the major aspects of the Middle Ages was a system called feudalism. Feudalism is a system in which monarchs or lords gave land to nobles. These nobles, in exchange, pledged their loyalty to the monarch, to the lord, and then these nobles themselves had knights that provided protection, and then the nobles also had workers called feuds who worked the land for slavery, serfdom, and this was the idea of feudalism. The Roman Catholic Church, which was Western Europe's major religious body at the time and still is today, brought Roman culture and principles of government and law to the regions of the Germanic peoples. Germanic peoples controlled this area. The Roman Catholic Church kind of brought unity and organization to these different nobles in the feudal systems, and it started to change the face of Europe. Muslims developed a culture in Spain and are still there today and are still the region's largest immigration community to Europe. Now moving on to expansion of Europe. Now there's a lot of different historical events that I'm going to hit really quickly. I'm doing it a big disservice, but that's all I can do. First one I want to look at is the Crusades. The Crusades were religious wars which Europeans set forth to reclaim the homeland. The homeland being Jerusalem, the birthplace of Christianity. The reason the Crusades had to take place was that the Muslims were in control of this region. The Muslims were in control of this region because that was their homeland as well. And they wanted to live in these areas and had been doing so for years. And the Europeans felt like they needed to kick them out. This was a Roman Catholic Church trying to kick the Muslims out of the Holy Land. Then we move on to the Renaissance, which is a time period in European history where there was a rebirth to the Roman era. You have a lot of Roman art, a lot of Roman architecture, you have a lot of Roman things in Europe during the Renaissance. And then the Reformation. We've touched on this before in the Latin America unit. The Reformation lessened the power of the Roman Catholic Church. This is the movement that began Protestantism because of the man named Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation, hence the Reformation, and this is that Reformation that we're talking about. And then Europe goes through a exploration period where they run out of land to explore on the European continent, so they set their eyes elsewhere. They were hoping to go to Asia and ended up finding the American North and South America because of Columbus's adventures, but they seek colonies elsewhere, which expanded Europe. Then we're going to move on to a changing Europe. The Enlightenment occurred. The Enlightenment placed importance of reason. This was when people started thinking for themselves and not looking at external powers. Just an area of scientific discovery. Then we move on to the French Revolution. What was important about the French Revolution for us, not only did it overthrow the French monarchy, but it spread ideals of democracy throughout the region and ideas of revolution that would change things throughout the region as well, which eventually bleed over into other areas like the United States. Now, the Industrial Revolution also occurred, probably one of the most important things in regards to the history of Europe. Because the region had excess coal and technology, the Industrial Revolution occurred. There was fuel to run the machines, to manufacture goods, and the region's economies boomed because of the Industrial Revolution. Population increased. We had the medical revolution soon after. People started living longer, living healthier lives. And honestly, we had stuff. And you all know how much we like stuff. And then communism. Communism is a society based on economic equality in which the workers would control the factory systems. It was coming at a time period in the Industrial Revolution where there was not a lot of labor laws. People were working incredible hours and getting paid next to nothing. And this idea began to develop that basically said that a free market enterprise was not going to do anything but create really rich business owners, and the laborers, the workers, were going to get poorer and poorer. World War I happened. After World War I, Germany was forced to pay extreme reparations, which allowed for the rise of a man by the name of Adolf Hitler. World War II started. World War II ended. And then the Cold War began. We're not going to spend a lot of time on World War I and World War II, but we are going to look a lot at the Cold War. The Cold War was a power struggle between the communist world, led by the Soviet Union, and the democratic world, led by the United States. It was referred to as the Cold War because it was cold, meaning there was no fighting directly between the United States and the Soviet Union. There was a lot of lesser wars, but never the Soviet Union and United States troops lining up and shooting at each other. The Cold War leads to East Germany suffering and West Germany flourishing. This is revolving around the idea of the Berlin Wall, something that you should probably bring up in class. Now, I do want to point out to you really quickly about the European Union, and we are going to touch on it again in a little bit, but the European Union, by the 1990s, a movement had been growing within Europe for a united Europe. The European Union's goal was to unite Europe with goods, services, and workers, and that goods, service, and workers could move freely among member countries and member nations. The Maastricht Treaty, which was signed in 1992, set goals for a central bank and a common currency in the euro, a shared money system within Europe as a whole. The idea of the European Union was that workers, known as guest workers, can move and work wherever they wanted to along member nations. They could just visit member nations without ever being asked if it's for business or for pleasure. They could do so as they wanted. The idea was to unite Europe, and to do so, these nations had to give up some of their sovereign power to a supranational organization, which is what the European Union was. And that was kind of hard for a lot of nations. I do want to take this time to point out to you the difference between East and Western Europe. We are going to come back to the idea, but Eastern Europe was controlled by the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Western Europe was controlled by the democratic powers of the United Kingdom, France, and the United States. And Western Europe predominantly did very well economically. Standard of living was really well. And you could still see that today. They're much more industrialized than East Germany. East Germany was controlled by the Soviet Union, and although East Germany was industrialized, it was not developed. The Soviet Union really took advantage of these areas and did not worry so much about the welfare of these countries. They were only worried about the money they could make. So it's important for you to look at this map and kind of identify Western European countries and Eastern European countries, because that's going to be a common recurring theme throughout this whole unit. And then last but not least, we're going to look at the economic spectrum. Now, I'm not going to identify a whole lot of countries here, but I do want you to look at the economic spectrum. Most of Eastern Europe is in between communism and socialism to a little bit free enterprise. You've got France just to the right of where Eastern Europe would, and then most of Western Europe is from France and then on to free enterprise. Again, Western Europe does really, really well, or is doing a whole lot better economically, and part of that is because of their limited government control of the economy. But it is kind of important for you to understand that Eastern Europe would be a little bit more to the left, while France and Western Europe would be a little bit more towards the right. And the Scandinavian Peninsula would also be socialist. Those nations in the Scandinavian Peninsula would be our socialist nations.